All right, well, hi everyone. I'm Brett Schwartz, an Associate Director at the NADO Research Foundation, and welcome to the final session of today's forum. We've covered a lot of grounds, and we're not done yet, but Jim Hamilton and I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on some of the key themes to emerge from today's conversations before we introduce our final two speakers. So I just want to borrow a phrase from one of my good colleagues at the U.S. Economic Development Administration, Dave Ives. And Dave is known to say that good economic development starts with good economic development planning. And that couldn't be more true for finding a starting point for addressing the impacts of nuclear plant closures. The challenges facing your communities call for creative and collaborative economic development planning that needs to be rooted in leveraging local assets, local talent, and local vision. And throughout the forum today, we've heard about many of these planning initiatives. And though each community is unique and the projects pursued may vary, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they used data, metrics, and other intel to make informed decisions about the way forward. So without this information at your fingertips, it's hard to know which way is up and which direction to row. So of course, we need good planning, we need good data, and the final piece, of course, is good collaboration. And I'd offer that any strategy to address plant closures must be a regional one. And we've heard this from so many of the speakers today. We know that economic shocks and disruptions don't give one thought to geographical or jurisdictional boundaries, which makes the need to prepare and respond a truly regional effort that goes beyond individual communities or counties. And as many of you know, in rural places where resources and support may be limited, a regional approach is almost required to achieve any positive, sustainable outcome. So of course, working together across boundaries and with many partners is easier said than done, but it's really the only way to lead to a more prosperous and inclusive future. So with that, I hope you leave the forum today feeling inspired and more connected to your peers who are also working day in and day out to address similar challenges in their communities. As we've heard from so many speakers, this is hard work, it's emotional work, but ultimately it's the potential to be transformative work that will impact your regions for years to come. So we know that we couldn't solve all the world's problems in a 4-hour forum, but the project team's really excited to continue to engage with you and find opportunities to collaborate and explore creative solutions to better support you and your communities. And we're very much looking forward to that journey together. So one final thought before I pass it over to Jim to introduce our speakers is that there will be a survey that'll pop up on the screen once you close out, as well as an email sent to you following the event today. Please take a few minutes to respond to that survey. It really helps us make sure that the trainings and the resources and the community that we're building is really addressing your needs and goals. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jim for some final thoughts, as well as to introduce our speakers. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Brett. So my job now is to introduce our final two speakers of the day, David Moore from the UK and Scott Morris from the US. Look, their job is not to tie a big ribbon around all of this and make everybody feel happy. I think what we're asking them to do is sort of share their observations about what the road ahead may look like on the path that we're all sort of on together. I think they offer very interesting perspectives. We're very fortunate to have both of them, and I'll give a brief intro of Councillor Moore and Scott, and then we'll turn it over to Councillor Moore to pick it up. So first of all, I want to welcome Councillor David Moore, who joins us from across the pond, where he's the Vice Chair of the UK's Nuclear Legacy Advisory Forum. Councillor Moore is also the Copeland Borough Councillor representing Seascale, Cumbria, which hosts the Sellafield nuclear facility. Thank you again, Councillor Moore, for being here. And if I could give you a gold star for showing up late in the evening, your time, I would, and we really appreciate your willingness to be here today. Back on this side of the pond, I want to introduce Scott Morris, who's the Regional Administrator for NRC's Region 4. You may ask yourself, what's Region 4? Well, you draw a line from North Dakota to Louisiana. Everything to the left of that is under Scott's jurisdiction. Scott's been with the NRC for several years in a variety of senior roles, but before that, he served for 7 years on active duty as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Navy Nuclear Submarine Program. Thank you and welcome, Scott. Let's get started with Councillor Moore. Take it away, Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thanks very much and good afternoon, everybody. Sounds a little strange saying that as the sun's setting here after a very pleasant sunny day. So the Nuclear Legacy Advisory Forum was set up a number of years ago because of the local authorities around the UK. Those are council authorities all that hosted nuclear facilities or nuclear waste storage facilities. So it brought a group of people together so that we could be like-minded and work together. I think a little bit about myself first is that most people think that everybody works in the nuclear industry. My background is farming. My family have farmed in West Cumbria for many generations, long before the nuclear industry came. And my experience I've gained in nuclear is by operating a farm 1 mile from the Sellafield complex. So I've grown up with nuclear, but never worked with inside the fence of the nuclear, but have worked as a community representative round the site. As you can see, our objectives from Nuleaf are really clear. It's that policy, strategy and practice for all our nuclear waste and legacy issues has the interests of the local authorities at central concern and leading to the best possible outcomes from communities that they serve. I think if we can move on. I think this map clearly shows the UK, for a small island, has a terrific amount of nuclear facilities. They start in the top of Scotland at Dounreay, which is one of the examples that we've got coming forward, to where we're based at Sellafield and the low-level waste repository, which is mid-UK, and the other is Berkeley, which is down towards the southern end of the UK. But as you can see, they are dotted around the UK and mainly around the coastal areas. Could I have the next slide, please? Nuclear in numbers, as you can clearly see, and you know yourselves, we got into this in the 1940s. The site close to me was Windscale at that time, which was clearly for the nuclear weapons program. At that time, little thought was given to the decommissioning. Calder Hall was then built alongside it, which was the first nuclear facility to provide electricity to the grid. They all grew up there with little thought to how the cleanup would have been done. It took some time and the sites operated, and we did a lot of work around reprocessing and continued to develop some of our nuclear facilities again without cleanup. The nuclear liability in the UK now is, as you can see, is 132 billion. That was a figure put together by the Public Accounts Committee on behalf of the government in 2020. Clearly, it now has the nuclear authority established, and the spend of the NDA is 3.3 billion per annum. That is spent right across those UK sites. And over the next 15 years, as you can see, all the sites will close, but it also supports 60,000 jobs. If we could have the next slide, please. I think one of the biggest key changes came with the Energy Act in 2004, when the NDA was formed, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority was formed. And that was an act of Parliament. It created the Energy Act. But the important thing for our communities, what that enshrined was that the real focus was now on cleanup of the sites. But what it gave was a commitment that it had a socio-economic responsibility while it was doing that cleanup, that it had to work with those communities to leave the legacy behind. It wasn't good enough just to go in and do cleanup and leave those areas. It had to mitigate the impact of the cleanup work that they were doing. There had to be that big impact onto socioeconomics, because most of these communities are remote rural by the nature of where we wanted our nuclear facilities at the time. They were usually built in the countryside and on the coast. Those communities have become very dependent on those nuclear facilities. And as I say, we know there is a lot of work in cleanup, but also ultimately decommissioning means that those sites will clean up and close. We've also got coming this year the decommissioning waste review policy. That's really interesting in starting to characterise the wastes. As you know, in the UK, we just have 3 categories of waste. Now those are going to be broken down into smaller amounts, allowing for perhaps different types of storage and allowing the faster cleanup of those sites. We've also got the Energy White Paper and Net Zero Strategy, and they're starting to talk about new build. But not all our facilities will be looking at new build as part of going forward. Some of these sites are cleaning, will clean. Could I have the next slide, please? So its mission is to clean up the mess that was left from behind, as we call it sometimes. Living next to one of the most complex facilities at Sellafield, we're aware of the risks and hazards that have been left in our community and neglected for many years. The NDA, from its formation now, is clearing itself ready for that big final push on the clean, and has split itself into 4 subsidiaries. And as you can clear from that, Sellafield, the complex that I live next to, has one of those subsidiaries just for its own use. It's a massive site and uses all the facilities that we have available. Magnox is there to look after the remaining Magnox sites. They're currently all now defueled, but awaiting decommissioning, some in care and maintenance, some just going through that final stages of their fuels have now been removed, and all those fuels have now gone to Sellafield. We also have the nuclear waste services, which is now looking at things like the geological disposal facility, as well as near surface disposal, those types of new arrangements that may come forward. And also it holds its nuclear transport services. You know, it holds 3 ships, which are mainly, I think they're the only 3 there is that can ship nuclear waste around the world, and are regularly used and operate from a port just below where we live here in West Cumbria. The geological disposal facility, I'll touch a bit later on that, but we've now got 3 communities that are now looking at taking forward further investigation works on that. We host 2 of those areas within the patch I'm on Copeland, and there are others in the UK that are coming forward to look at the possibility. We will start work this summer off the coast doing some seismic survey work looking at that. Could we move on, please? So what we're here for was to look at examples of socioeconomic actions that have been taken around the community. In the next slide, please. As I explained, what you've got in front of you is Sellafield. To the right-hand side of that complex is my farm. But as you can see, it's a 10 square kilometre patch of probably classed as the most hazardous nuclear site across Europe. It's a very tight confine, but as you can see, it's actually surrounded by rural and agriculture, and is right on the edge of a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. So all compact into this small area, we've got tourism, agriculture and nuclear. You can see from the pond on the left, the aging facilities that we've got. No, sorry, you can move on. So the aging facilities, I'm sure you're all well aware of the state of these. What we developed in West Cumbria was a nuclear prospectus, because we do consider ourselves to have a future in nuclear. We know that the cleanup of the Sellafield site, and as you can see, 27,000 jobs are in Sellafield and the supply chain. That will be cleaning up for the next 120 years. But it is the fact that most of the high hazards will be starting to be cleared over the next 10 to 12 years. And therefore, we've got a highly skilled workforce that we need to find other work for, and that's why we're very keen now. We're one of the communities that are bidding for the fusion reactor. There are now five communities that are pushed forward. That's all in that nuclear prospectus that we set out. We're looking at renewables, the hydrogen, we're looking at SMR and AMR reactors. So we as a community put together that nuclear prospectus, which we could go to the government with and say, these are our ambitions to drive a green agenda here, to come into play around 10 years' time as the workforce starts to do the work on the site starts to drop away. We could have the next slide, please. So that's some of the innovation that we have, and the Sellafield site sits at the heart of it. It's the cleanup operation. It's where the innovation happens. It's where the skills happen. And as part of that, what we've also developed, because we've received £10 million at Sellafield annually of socioeconomic funding. Now, we don't just spend that. We want to work in partnership with the nuclear industry on how that spend goes. It doesn't just come into the local authorities with a free hand on how to spend it. What we've done with the Innovation Hub, as you can see, what we call the Industrial Solutions Hub, which we've just started to develop, is a joint project between the local authorities and the nuclear industry to put together the Industrial Solutions Hub that will, the technologies from Sellafield, what we want is an area off-site where they can be developed, enhanced and marketed. You know, we want this to be the area where people come for solutions to nuclear. You know, we're cleaning up some of the most hazardous plant. We want to do that work that's been done there in robotics and that, so we can make it a saleable asset, giving the community a vested interest in that. And as you can see around that, the hydrogen and the advanced manufacturing. So community-led, communities at the heart of it. We moved to Berkeley Green. This is quite an interesting complex. That was part of a nuclear site at one point. It was within the fence boundaries. It's been turned into an innovation centre for engineering, both for nuclear and renewables. But it's what's now happening. It's now going to pass over to those local authorities to manage, because it'd be the first part of a nuclear licensed site that has been now fully cleaned, and the fence is now outside the fence and is able to be passed over. So £5 million worth of investment went into that, but also the assets now been handed back to the local community to run that campus, the local authority to train people, mainly young people, back into that for the nuclear industry. But I think the important part is that those legacy sites are now able to be cleaned to a way that they can now be handed back into the community. Scrabster Harbour, very interesting. I showed you in the early map right at the top of Scotland is the Dounreay site. It's quite a small site, but what it had there was a harbour. Dounreay, because it's in Scotland, will have no new nuclear facilities. The Scottish government's policy is no further nuclear. So as they clean that site up, it's clearly there will be no more nuclear on that site. So the investment's been made, and it's some £15 million has been invested into the harbour, which not only has been allowed to develop, it can now support the oil and gas industry. It now supports a lot of the renewable technologies that are happening around the coast, and they are looking at hydropower as well off the coast. But also, as you can see, the far part of the harbour was dredged so that they can now bring in cruise ships. Smaller cruise ships can now dock there. So they're now turning that economy so it will not have a nuclear heart anymore. It will develop that community, and they can develop the other things around that. It was originally a fishing port, and it'll still do that, but it's now widened out, and that's allowed. It's estimated that it will grow 18% year on year. That's away from nuclear, and its dependency will no longer be there. We've always talked about that social license to operate, and the industry is regulated heavily, but one of the biggest regulators has to be our local communities, which are at the heart of these. We've always said to Sellafield and those other sites, you could not operate in our communities if you're not that good neighbour, if you're not committed to the cleanup of the future and helping us sort a good sustainable future with a mix of nuclear and a mix of move back to some of the key industries that we've had here. But we recognise that nuclear is at the heart of what we do here in West Cumbria, and we have real ambitions to push nuclear forward to support the clean-up, because the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority gets its money from the government to clean up, and if we do not turn that into an operation that can bring in revenue, we have a fear that as we move down the road and the major hazards are cleaned, the desire for budget and treasury to fund nuclear cleanup may start to drop away. And therefore we want the Decommissioning Authority to take a stake in the new future investments to bring in revenue to assist that cleanup. So in conclusion, you can see there it's 132 billion, 120 years of mission. I mean, that's a great thing to advertise in itself, except it is decommissioning. Any company would be glad to say it had 120 years worth of work, but it is work to close that part of the site. We've developed a good approach. We're working really well, but I think the community has to have the vision to drive that nuclear industry. The community needs to lead the vision and drive that really at the heart of everything they want, because those are the people that will be left with the legacy. So those are the people that need to have the vision. So I thank you. I don't know how long I took of my 10 minutes, but
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. That was a really refreshing perspective of possibilities, and I think what you emphasized over and over again is the community driving its own future. That came across, and I think it resonates pretty well with what we've heard from others on this side of the pond. So thank you again. I'm going to turn it over now to Administrator Morris for some words from the NRC. Scott?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jim, and thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity today. I don't have slides, so I'm just gonna talk at you for a little bit, maybe help fill in a few gaps, give you some different perspectives. I am Scott Morris. I'm a 30-year vet of the NRC. I've worked in virtually every part of the agency, doing everything from policy development to rulemaking to licensing to emergency preparedness, inspection, etc. So I happen to be the administrator for Region 4, which Jim pointed out is the Western US and its territories in the Pacific. Of course, our agency is a fairly small independent agency. You know, we're not part of the DOE. We're only about 2,800 people nationwide. And our sole function is, as a federal regulator, is to ensure the public health and safety from the use and security from the use of nuclear and radioactive materials. So it's a pretty well-defined mission. We're the only ones that do it. And we have a lot of passion for the work. We have, this is, as you know, a very dynamic environment that we're in right now on many levels. And it's certainly the same is true in the nuclear realm, power reactor world. Talk about everything, lots of excitement around new builds and advanced reactor licenses in-house, as well as the increase in decommissioning of the legacy fleet. So in Region 4 alone, we've got, let's see, San Onofre undergoing active decommissioning, Fort Calhoun Station in Nebraska. We just terminated the license at Humboldt Bay up in California. And of course, we know we've got Diablo Canyon on the near-term horizon, and GE Valicitos, which is a smaller, older research facility, which is also going to be occurring this decade as well. So there's a lot of different aspects of what we do. And I want you to know that stakeholder engagement is a key part of our success. We know we can't be tone deaf. We know we have to listen. We know there's no one-size-fits-all solution. But as a national federal regulator, we have to set standards that can be applied universally and adapted to site-specific needs. Right now, we don't have a comprehensive decommissioning set of regulations. Everything that's being done in decommissioning right now is being done through the exemption process. Onesie, twosies, gradually moving through getting exemptions to existing requirements for operating reactors. That's not efficient, that's not effective. In the long term, we know that. There's a proposed rule that's on the street right now. It's published in the Federal Register. I think it went up earlier this month, or early last month, I should say. And the window for public comments is open until March 17th. My colleagues in the headquarters office of nuclear materials safety and safeguards, they own the NRC's rulemaking process for the whole agency. They're going to be hosting public meetings around the country here in the coming weeks during that public comment period and they're actively looking for and inviting public comments, thoughts, concerns, challenges, perceived challenges, etc., with what's being proposed in our decommissioning rule. The rule touches virtually every aspect that you can think of in the decommissioning realm, from funding, decommissioning funding, to emergency preparedness requirements as they change, environmental considerations, spent fuel management, all the way through records retention. So and a whole lot of things I didn't mention. So again, that's a very important, ongoing, very active activity that we're engaged in, and we're looking for your comments. We also have a pretty decent website too. So if you want more information, I can certainly direct you to that as well. We host probably 1,000 public meetings a year, and we get invited, folks like me get invited to many more than that aren't our own public meetings, such as this. So these are great opportunities to explain to folks our role and our responsibilities but also to listen and to collect feedback and to take questions. And when we don't have the answers, we take them back and think through them and try to make sure they get factored into our eventual decision making. So there's a couple other things that you're probably aware that are going on. There are consolidated interim storage facilities that there are 2 applications came in. We've already licensed one in West Texas. The other one in New Mexico is still going through our licensing process. There are, as you probably know, some concerns being raised by the state and some of the locals with respect to our licensing of both of those facilities. And that's their right. That's part of the adjudicatory process, and we're working through that. We think we did a good job with public outreach before, when we received those applications, and as we went through the environmental assessments associated with those facilities. But trying to address every concern is impossible, because there are diametrically opposed concerns as you're in interests, as you're aware. So we do our best to make sure we understand what those concerns are, that they get fully evaluated as part of our deliberative process, and that when we do render a decision, that our basis for making that decision is clear about the why. It's not just here it is. It's important that we also, and it's essential that we share the why. And even then, we're going to get concerns as we're finding now with those 2 consolidated interim storage facility applications. So it's part of the process. It's a difficult, challenging process. But again, our role is not to pick winners and losers about, in all of this. It's to make sure that the applications that we receive meet our requirements, and that the eventual construction or demolition, as the case may be, is done in a safe and secure manner that protects the public health and the environment. But again, we don't pick winners and losers from a community standpoint, so to speak. But that doesn't mean we don't listen to those and try to factor those into the concerns that those stakeholders, such as many of you on this call, have relative to the licensing and policy work that we do. We also cooperate pretty heavily with our friends in the Department of Energy. Many of you know they're actively looking for a consent-based siting location for high-level waste. This is something that I think we can all agree is long overdue, but they are encouraged. I'm encouraged that there is a bipartisan effort now to try to get to rally support for that. I think in part recognizing the role of nuclear in our national future, and the need to have a strategy to deal with the back end of the fuel cycle. So that's encouraging, that's exciting. Again, we're working closely in partnership with DOE and others as we go through that. I also want to make sure that folks know that we do have an active program to interface with our state counterparts. I have a state liaison officer that works directly in my office for me, actually directly. In fact, he's in California this week working with the governor's, the California Energy Commission point of contact, but he's also interacting very closely with the tribal nations and to a lesser extent, some of the local communities. The last thing I'll mention, Jim, before I hand it back is, environmental justice is another issue that involves community level engagement. The commission has asked the staff to formulate a policy relative to environmental justice for all of our licensed activities. And just earlier this week, it culminated about a 9-month project that involved people from around the agency and lots of public meetings and stakeholder engagements to formulate a draft policy for the commission's consideration. And that draft policy was submitted to the commission earlier this week for their consideration. So we're looking forward to their decision making and rollout on that. So with that, I will stop there. You may have questions, and I want to be able to leave a little bit of time for questions should they be out there. So thank you for the time, Jim. I really appreciate giving the invite.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Councillor Moore. So I'm torn. I'd like to, on the one hand, I'd like to engage in a Q&A session, but I'm also cognizant that we're a little bit over time and I got 60 people on Zoom who are probably anxious to get on with the rest of their day. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to choose the latter, and maybe we can find alternate vehicles or avenues to engage in more dialogue, but I want to be respectful of the larger cohorts, schedule. So I'm going to try and wrap things up with a few housekeeping notes. First, I'm going to say this a few times, but thank you to our speakers, to our audience, to the internal team who pulled this off. It really went well, and we really appreciate all your work. We're having informal networking sessions available. If you exit this and click the networking button, you'll be passed on to a sort of a similar breakout session like you had before for the previous sessions. If you have a moment, please fill out the participant survey that we're dropping into the chat right now to let us know how we did and how we can do better. We'll be sharing this recording and additional resources via email soon. Not to sound horribly cliche, but the nuclear communities team is here to help. We've got federal funding to help and support host communities through their journey. Simply reach out and see if we can find ways to work together. Thank you again to the speakers. This was the first one of these that we've pulled off, I think, pretty much ever in this country. An event or a forum focused on host communities. We want to make this not a one and done. We'll try and make this an annual event with your support. So look forward to future announcements along that front. Have a great rest of your day or evening, Councillor Moore. Again, we appreciate all of your work and attention to this matter, and be well and be safe. Good night.